All right, hello and welcome to the Middle East Forum Speaker Webinar Series. I'm Stacy Roman and I will be moderating this discussion today. We are pleased to have Luke Moon, Deputy Director of the Philos Project, join us to discuss Evangelicals in Israel, on the brink or back together. Mr. Moon will speak for 10 to 15 minutes, then open it up for questions. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Luke Moon.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you all. I think I first need to start by answering the question, what is an evangelical? Because, you know, in today's climate, evangelical has come to have a lot more political connotations. But I think when we talk about evangelicals, it's important to actually go back to how it's broken out, what makes an evangelical. And there tends to be 4 criteria for this. One is, you know, you believe that Jesus is the only way to God, that you must be born again, that you have to share your faith. But the most important one for I think, our discussion here is that you believe the Bible is the inspired, inerrant Word of God. And that becomes the framework, the backdrop for evangelical support for Israel. The Bible is key here because, you know, the Christians read their Bible and they see Israel, Jewish people, Jerusalem, all over the place. And it becomes the real reason that Christian support for Israel is strong. There's a lot of false assumptions that the reason that evangelicals support Israel has something to do with the end times, that, you know, somehow all the Jews need to go back to the land of Israel in order for Jesus to return, at which point, you know, you all be converted or I don't know, thrown in the pit of hell or something strange like that. But you know, if support among evangelicals, white evangelicals support's about 78%, it's about 60% for Hispanics, 50% for African Americans, 50% for Catholics, even 50% of mainline Protestants support Israel. And if it was about the end times, you wouldn't have any of that, because I'm a Christian, I'm evangelical, and I go to church each Sunday, and don't think I have heard a sermon about the end times in a church I've been involved with in probably 15 years, right? So what does that say? That says that support for Israel among evangelicals is not rooted in some kind of like end times, like conspiracy. Now there is that, I mean, not conspiracy side, but there are Christians that certainly do believe that Israel's role in the end times is significant, and they can play that out. But that is not the basis for evangelical support. The basis for evangelical support for Israel is found in the Bible. Now, it's important that you know, when Christians read their Bible, like I said before, they see, you know, Jerusalem, Israel. I was reading an article today about a guy who was significantly impacted by a trip to Capernaum, right? I can tell you my first experience to Israel was back in 2012. And I remember, you know, walking the streets of Jerusalem, going on the Mount of Olives, looking at these places where, you know, Jesus stood and walked and taught. And I thought, man, this is crazy. It kind of got under my skin. Now, back in 2014, I wrote an article that was similar to that of an article that David Brogg posted on the site here, in which laid out some of the challenges facing evangelical support for Israel. In the article that I wrote in the Tower, I outlined 4 organizations that I thought were, in a sense, pillars of evangelicalism, and therefore, you know, that were, this is anti-Zionist, and as a result, were leading evangelicals away from support for Israel. Those organizations I highlighted: World Vision, Willow Creek Church, Wheaton College, and in the article I talked about an organization called Telos, but if I had written it a couple of years later, I would have added an organization called Biblica to that list, which was is responsible for the publication of probably one of the most popular Bible translations that currently exists. So let me unpack those, and I'll tell you where they are now. Because when I got the invitation to speak here, I decided to go back and look at that article way back when. It was certainly a walk down memory lane, because World Vision at the time, 2014, had a staff of probably 120 there in Jerusalem, and their area of focus was Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. So they intentionally, I think, left off Israel off their list, and they had in 2016, one of their staffers had gotten busted for laundering money to Hamas, and it became a big deal. And I wrote an article at that point laying out how World Vision had basically been an anti-Israel organization all the way back to the guy that was the second second president, who was actually forced to resign because he compared the Jews, the IDF to Nazis in southern Lebanon. Though they had a long history of anti-Israelism, and today World Vision, back then, if you looked at their social media, for every, if they posted 5 days a week, it'd be why Israel is hurting children in Gaza, why is Israel hurting people in the West Bank, and why is Israel doing this and Israel doing that, and then on Friday, somebody would post, it would be a Jewish person writing, why I'm embarrassed to be a Jew, right? Because of Israel or whatever, right? So it was a very anti-Israel, anti-Zionist organization there in Jerusalem, and now they're basically down to a staff of about 15. Their budget is cut significantly, and they're nothing like what they were. And I think it's because of the pressure that I and others had applied to World Vision for their singular focus on anti-Israel and anti-Zionist, particularly anti-Christian Zionist perspective. Second, Willow Creek Church. Willow Creek was one of the largest mega churches in the world, certainly one of the largest in the United States, and ran an annual leadership conference called the Willow Creek Leadership Conference. And the Hybels, Bill and Lynn Hybels, were known for their kind of anti-Christian Zionist, anti-Israel rhetoric. It was often soft and couched in some cases in more sophisticated rhetoric, but nonetheless, they had a huge influence, because if you were a mega church, and a mega church is anybody who has a church of over 2,500 people on an average Sunday, then you would, Willow Creek was one of the organizations that you look to. Now, 2020, the Bill and Lynn Hybels were Bill was kind of forced to resign after accusations of marital infidelity, and Willow Creek's involvement in the Middle East has all but dried up at this point. The third, it was Wheaton College, which is the kind of the Christian Harvard, if you will. We had been trying to get pro-Israel trips out of Wheaton for a long time. It was Gary Burge, the infamous author of a very anti-Zionist critique that was used by the Presbyterian Church USA in its pro-BDS efforts. Was a big player in an organization called Christ at the Checkpoint. All of these, Gary was kind of a main player at Wheaton College, and was basically made it almost impossible to get pro-Israel groups to do tours to Israel, or even get a pro-Israel club started on the campus. That changed. He retired, or he moved to a different college. He now is at Calvin, and we have now taken every year through our passages program, Christian kind of birthright type program. We've taken hundreds of Wheaton students to Israel at this point. So Biblica, as one of the ones I would have mentioned on that earlier article, they published basically a social justice Bible, if you will, modeled after the NIV, and in it kind of opens and lays out the kind of how you read a Bible, how you unpack a Bible, and in the section after the Pentateuch goes from according to, by the layout that they have, Joshua through I think Nehemiah. Basically talks about here, this is in quotes. This is like, here the people of Israel enter the land of Palestine, okay, which is patently absurd, because there was no land of Palestine at the time when the Jews entered from the Exodus, the wanderings, right? And yet this was the ridiculous stuff that was being promoted by Biblica. They got challenged heavily on it, called out heavily on it, and I think that Bible ended up never seeing the light of day, and it was didn't get a lot of printings. Finally, probably one of the more influential organizations was a group called Telos, which did a more sophisticated protest tours, the kind that they you go sit down with a have dinner with a settler. Mind you, that's the only time that you meet any actual pro-Israel Zionists in your tour. The rest is a lot of kind of more here's why the Palestinians are suffering at the hands of the Zionists. And in the end of your Telos tour, you'll come out, as most people do, kind of really kind of anti-Israel. And Telos is actually not doing well. 2020 coronavirus has made a big impact on their bottom line, and I'm not sure that they're going to survive the rest of the year. So, wins in the pro-Christian Zionist camp among evangelicals is quite high in terms of organizations. It also helps that you have the embassy move, and you had the Golan Heights recognition, and you had the recognition that settlements don't violate international law. And you have the rise of the global South, which is largely is evangelical and very pro-Israel, almost very, very pro-Israel, in which we should start to see a huge number. I don't know if there's a huge number of them, but a lot of embassies begin to move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem over the next several years, as the influence of evangelicals in the global South increases and moves into the political arena. The downside, here's where I'm concerned, is that Israel has all but become a political issue, dividing right and left. For a long time, it was kind of bipartisan. I mean, AIPAC would love it to be still bipartisan, but it is increasingly, Israel is a right-left issue, and the perception is that it's kind of wrapped up in everything connected with evangelicals, right? So in a sense, whether the average pro-Israel Jewish person in New York likes it or not, we are in the same basket in terms of our political, the outcomes of, I think, November will significantly impact our, where the pro-Israel world breaks out. I don't think you're going to lose evangelicals anytime soon. Even the recent stats on millennial support for Israel, millennial evangelical support for Israel, there's some decline there, but it's in the 5 to 7 point range, which is, not small, but it's also it's not precipitous like it I think it could be, or in some cases have been in some other demographics. So that's, I think, where things are at, and I'd love to take your questions.
Right, thank you so much. We have quite a few questions coming in. First one is, how much influence do pro-Israel evangelicals have on the Trump administration?
Well, I think they have a lot. The Evangelical Roundtable is made up of, I know a good number of them, and across the board, they're almost all pro-Israel, in a very kind of in a very strong way, right? Like, it wouldn't surprise me if you polled the Evangelical Roundtable that advises Trump and asked them on support for something even as particularly controversial as annexation of the West Bank and settlements. I think you would even see support for that move higher among the Evangelical Roundtable than you would among average evangelicals or even average Jews.
Wonderful, thank you. And you were just talking about the younger Christians and their views towards pro-Israel. Can you just compare this a little more to the older Christians and expand upon that?
Yeah, when asked, the way where it breaks out a little bit more is that younger evangelicals tend to, if they're asked, do you support Israel or the Palestinians or both, you get an increasing number of the millennials will say both, right? Like, it's almost like they don't want to be forced to pick sides. I think and you get this a lot with with pastors in churches as well. Like, Israel is one of those issues that an average pastor will make a risk reward calculation and they go, you know what, it's just not worth it for me to make this case one way or another because somebody in the congregation is going to get upset with me, right? And pastors are actually risk averse, right? They don't bring up a lot of controversial issues, right? And so as a result, you don't get this it's not like the younger evangelicals are becoming anti-Israel. They're just they don't want to really be seen as picking sides. We're to use the Telos's framing, we're pro, right? Pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, pro-peace, pro-Jesus, to which I would add pro-unicorn, because it's it fits on a bumper sticker nicely, but the hard work of engaging with that region and the people in it doesn't fit on a bumper sticker. And I think Christians should recognize that there is a saying among jihadis in particular, first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people, and we've seen this across the Middle East, that the Christians are leaving. They're gone. In 2003, there was a couple million Iraqi Christians, and now it's down to maybe 250,000, right? And you can't put that on Israel, right? Just as I don't think you can put the declining number of Christians in Bethlehem up all on Israel's shoulders either. That world doesn't work, right? So younger evangelicals, I think, are motivated by the compassion narrative, by the social justice narrative. Both of those do carry weight, but I don't see it. It's not currently translating into kind of anti-Israel sentiment as much as it's indifference, because they got a lot of other issues that feed it to their list of concerns.
Understood. Thank you. Do you think that the Christian leaders that diminish the importance of churches, Christian readings of the Hebrew scriptures, and just focus on the New Testament have much influence on U.S. Christian views of Israel?
Yeah, actually, I do. I mean, I think that is certainly a problem in the evangelical churches, that they can focus on a bit too much on the New Testament, if you will, right? Or ignoring it. It becomes there was a famous heretic called Marcion back in I don't know, 400. Somebody's gonna give me a hard time because I'm not naming the time right, but nonetheless, he was basically said, the God of the New Testament is different than the God of the Old Testament. The God of the Old Testament was a tribal deity, but now we see that Jesus is really who God is, and so we need to get rid of the Old Testament out of reading from churches and that kind of thing. And he that was declared a heresy. But you have a lot of particularly pastors, I would say, that tend to be on the more progressive wing of the evangelicalism, that tend to downplay. They don't know what to do with the violence of the Old Testament, and a lot of it hangs on that Jesus was nonviolent, and therefore, and so, and if Jesus is God, then how do you answer all the the commands of God in the Old Testament to, I don't know, wipe out Jericho completely, destroy Ai, and not let nothing be left alive, right? That doesn't fit, and so it's easier to say, well, we'll just jettison that whole part of the book altogether because I just don't want to deal with it, and we'll talk about the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor in spirit. There's so it's I'm being a bit facetious here, but it does matter, that Christians are taught the whole of Scripture, the Old and New Testament, and I would say also be taught the Book of Revelation, because there is, like I said, it's actually kind of sad that in the last 15 years, I don't think I've heard a single sermon on the end times in a pulpit, and I go to church every Sunday. So, but I'm also not, I don't go to the types of churches that where that kind of thing would almost happen every week. But I'm as representative of an average white evangelical as most. So.
Well, thank you for that. We have a question in about Mark Green. Is he still involved with the BDS anti-Israel movement as he was 5 years ago or so? And does the Worldwide Meeting and Power 21 have an anti-Israel agenda that he is aware of?
So I know that so Mark Green was behind a movie called Little Town of Bethlehem, and back in, gosh, it must have been 2014. I actually confronted Mart about that book, or not that book, but that film. And even like when I confronted him in actually it was probably 2015. When I confronted him in 2015, like I might as well like punched him in the face. Like the guy walked away from me as fast as he could. It was clear that like he wanted nothing. It was like, it was, someone comes to him and it was like a moment of, I think a lack of clarity, if you will, in which he got involved in producing that movie. And I think he is like, he wants nothing to do with it. I mean, I don't know that Mart, he was responsible for a bookstore chain. I don't know I don't even know that bookstore chain even still exists. But there is nothing like it was. They were, it's the Green families behind the Museum of the Bible, and I think of the $100,000 probably that Mart spent on that Little Town of Bethlehem movie has been outsized by the millions and millions of dollars that the Green family has spent on promoting pro-Israel, pro-Jewish content, both at the Museum of the Bible and for helping start an organization called Passages, which has taken almost 10,000 Christian college students to Israel, right? So for all the the movie's bad, but I think the response by the Green family in their pro-Israel support should settle any questions about that. Now, I don't know. I'm not involved in Power 21. It's a global movement. There are some people in that movement who I think share some anti-Israel views, and that's unfortunate. But I think the main thrust of that organization, it's mostly in charismatic and Pentecostal circles, and the global South is ridiculously pro-Israel. And I don't see that, the handful of anti-Israel activists within Empower 21 have any real long-term influence over a much stronger pro-Israel support. And let me bring up one more point about Empower 21. They tried to have they're pro. They have a guy in there that was very a Palestinian Christian guy who's a part of that network, and they were going to have a conference. They had a conference in Jerusalem. They were going to have a conference in Jordan in at the same time, and then also they were going to do an evening in Bethlehem. The evening in Bethlehem got canceled, and the evening in Jordan got canceled because it was associated. It was accused of being Zionist. Okay, so no matter what, they lose on both sides, right? But it's because they were gonna, like, the thing that can't happen at all in both those places, that Christians actually evangelize to Muslims. Actually, that was the bigger problem. It's not about Israel. So.
Gotcha. Well, if you could just let us know where we could find some more information on your work and the Philos project, that'd be fantastic.
So philosproject.org is our website. We have a great portal there called Jaffa Gate, which gives kind of a breakdown of news and commentary from around the Near East. And obviously, I'm there, and I'm available also on social media. You can find me, and I'm happy to have any kind of follow-up conversations with anybody, because I love this stuff. It's fun.
And I'm sure our viewers will take you up on that. We have quite a few unanswered questions coming in. Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've come to the close of our webinar. Thank you again for speaking with us today.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
For our viewers, please join us Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern for Israel Insider with Ashley Perry, and again on Friday for South Asian Muslims and the American Experience with former Ambassador Hussein Haqqani. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.